I'm really glad you came tonight.
Yeah, me too.
Hey, I hope you don't mind, but I was talking to Kenny and Pud about your situation, and they'd really like to meet with you.
About what?
Well, when I had a similar situation when I lost my job, I met with them, and the church would love to help you out, and they'd really like to sit down with you and talk about your situation with you.
I don't know. All right. I'll do it.
Okay, great.
right.
Well, take care, and I'll see you later.
Thanks, man. Thanks for inviting me.
You bet.
All right. Take care, Warren.
All right, morning, everyone. Great to have you guys out here and with us at the crossing. Thanks for coming out. This is your first time with us. Thanks for giving us a look. We hope that you feel very welcomed here. We're in a series called For, and we talked last week as we started that God is for you. We're going to talk about today, God is for the community, for others. Next week, we're going to talk about God is for action, and then we're going to wrap it all up by talking about God is for us as a church body. And so last week, if you were with us or if you missed it, we talked about the idea that no matter where you've been, what you're involved in, what you may be getting involved in, that God loves you. He is for you. And when you come to this church, welcome, because you are joining and sitting around a group of messed up people that's led by messed up people who our only reason for existence is so that we can introduce you to the one who cleans up the mess. And so when you come in here and you're bringing all your baggage and all your stuff, you have people here that can look at you and honestly say, me too. I get that. Some of them know exactly what you're going through because they're struggling with the exact same thing, but everyone here has struggled. But what we talked about last week is as a church, as a body, we can't just say, you struggle with that? Well, me too. Hey, let's struggle with it together. You know, let's start a support group. I'll support you in your sin, you support me in your sin. And that'd be great. We have to have more than that. We also talked about that there's a real danger in a group like this or many churches where you say, you're struggling with sin? Me too. But just not as bad as you. I'm just not as bad of a sinner as you are. I mean, you're here, I'm here. We can't be that way either because in God's eyes, we've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So how do we respond when we say me too? And we talked about what is really important is we say, me too, but what are we going to do about that? Because there is someone who came to clean up the mess, and that is Jesus. And so while he did that, now what are we going to do? How are we going to change? What do we need to do to spur one another on and encourage each other in our growth? So that's the response we need to have. We want people to come in. We want people to feel welcome here, to feel comfortable in this environment, to know that they are among people who can say, me too. But we have to say, me too, but now what? Because he died for us. And so what are we going to do? Well, today I want to talk about being the church, and when I talk about church, folks, I know that in the vernacular of today's society, the church is the building. This is a school auditorium. We haven't owned a building until about a month ago. So we've been a church for 5.5 years without a building. So the church is not the building. The church is the people. And so when I talk about church, I always want you to understand, we're not talking about some structure. We're talking about people. And so today, what I want to talk about is we as a church need to be for our community. We need to be for others. We've said all along from the very beginning, we want to be a church that's known more for what we are for than what we are against. We want to be a church that's known to be for the community. We want to be a benefit to the community that God has placed us in, not a liability. I've always said, anybody remember growing up watching Little House on the Prairie? Some of us watched it during the first run. And others have watched it during the multiple runs. But if you ever remember watching Little House on the Prairie, there's a couple things that I want to point out. First of all, you cried sometime during Little House on the Prairie. You just had to. There's no way. If you didn't cry, then you don't have a pulse. But the other thing is, if you'll ever notice there in good old Walnut Grove, there was in the heart of that little community, the church. But it wasn't just the church. It was also the school. And it wasn't just the school, it was the place where the community came whenever there was a crisis, whenever there was a trial, or whenever they needed to get their heads together to solve something, a town meeting. And it may be naive of me, but it has always been my vision for the Crossing, being the people, to be that kind of place. That we are a part of this community, that we are the center of this community. See, the problem is once we become followers of Jesus, we call it Christian. Once we become a Christian, and a lot of times once we plant ourselves in a church, here's the reality. The church becomes much more inward focused than outward focused. It just happens. We tend to focus more on my needs, what I need. We focus more inwardly. Carey Nieuwhof says it this way: our natural drift is always towards ourselves, not on Christ, not on others. The gravitational pull of any church is towards insiders, not outsiders. And left unattended, your church will become a place where the preferences of the members trumps the passion for the mission. The mission is to go ye therefore into the world. That's the mission. But what happens is we become much more inward focused. Anybody remember when you went to school, maybe way back, or if you're a teacher, you know this, when you're real young, they did a little thing, it was always a favorite, called show and tell. Does anybody remember show and tell? When you would do show and tell, the whole concept is that you would bring something into the class to show, and as you were showing it, then you would tell about it. And as you were telling about it, maybe that thing that you brought in to show had something that was very meaningful to you. There was something about that thing that you were showing off that you were teaching people about or was special to you. I remember before I became a youth minister, I was actually going to college to be a school teacher. I wanted to teach, I wanted to coach. And so I actually did a year of student teaching. And while I was doing student teaching, as a 5th grade teacher, I was teaching on history, and I loved history. I decided to bring in something to show the class as I was telling it. So what I did is we were talking about the colonial settlement times and how they were very self-sustaining, and they came up with all these creative ways of doing things. And one of the things that I was talking to them about is the water wheel, and how the water would run down, cause the wheel to spin, which would cause a crank to turn, which would cause basically concrete or something very heavy to take this hardened corn and grind it up into this grist. And so I was at the Cades Cove water mill, and I picked up a bag of corn that had been ground up and was basically this powder substance. And so I thought, you know what, I'm not just going to tell them about it, I'm going to show it to them. So I had this baggie full of this corn grist mill, and I passed it around. And everybody, I said, you know, touch it, look at it, feel it, smell it. I mean, really imagine, this was hard kernels of corn, and now feel it. And so they passed it around the class, and this girl raises her hand, and she says, Mr. Wyatt. Now, in Kentucky, where I was at, the name White really has one syllable, but in Kentucky there, it was 2 syllables. It was always Mr. Wyatt. And so she raised her hand. I'm like, yeah, what is it? She goes, do you know what that smells like? That smells like my mama's breast milk, don't you think? So my teacher, Mrs. Martin, who was sitting there in the class, looked down over her glasses and said, well, Mr. White? Show and tell was over at that moment. At that moment, we're like, hey, who wants to go to recess? Hey, yeah, come on. That was one of those times where I was so glad show and tell was over. But here's the whole point of that story. When it comes to the church, we have gotten to the point where we're really good at telling people stuff. We're just not so hot at showing people stuff. We're really good at telling. We're just lousy at showing. And the world is watching. They're watching us. And all they hear is a lot of talk, but they don't see a lot of showing. They don't see it. And the problem is there's sometimes what we show has no resemblance to what we tell. What we're showing looks very little like what it is that we're telling. My friend Tony Wolff, in his book Serve One, wrote this: "The world will be convinced Jesus is the best option when Christianity produces the very best individuals." The world will be convinced that Jesus is the answer when the people who call themselves followers of his are the very best examples. But here's the problem. It seems more common for us to tell than it is to show. Christians love to tell others what they need to do to get right with God. They love to tell that. They love to tell about God's love and why he's needed in our lives. And for the most part, a lot of our churches have forgotten the importance that showing God's love is as crucial as telling about God's love. And as I said, sadly, what we show doesn't match up with what we say. You know, there's not a church in America, in the world, that doesn't have as a core value, we need to be serving and loving our community. Every church would say that. We need to love and serve our community. But here's the problem. They become so focused inwardly that if they're going to love or have any interaction with their community, it's more from a distance that they have to shout it. They have to yell it. And many of them isolate themselves to the point where they start to create our own little subcultures. Because, we don't want to bump up against the people of the world. And I don't think this all happened intentionally. I think we had the old idea that, we're to be in the world but not of it. I think that's where it comes from. But what's happened is we aren't even in it anymore. We've kind of removed ourselves for it. We didn't like the direction schools were going, so we started Christian schools. We didn't like what was happening in the business community, so we started these Christian business organizations. We have our own Christian books, we have our own Christian music, we have our own Christian TV, we have our own Christian radio stations, and now today, thank goodness, we even have our own Christian mints. They're called Testaments. You can pick them up at any Christian bookstore next to the Christian counter. And the reason we did that is because regular mints just aren't good enough. You need Testaments. Because regular mints might be a stumbling block to you, maybe. I don't know. And so we have Testaments. And so what we've done is we've created these little subcultures of Christian everything. And as I said, I don't think we set out to do that, but I think over time, again, we've become very inward focused. The gravitational pull in each and every one of us is inward, not outward. And so what happens over time is we begin to see the community as a threat. We begin to see the community as not a us as much as it's an us against them. And we begin to feel very uncomfortable in the community. And so what we do is we set up our little comfort zones, our own little sub-communities that we can all sit in. And then we're surprised when the people in the community don't want to walk in the doors and be amongst the people of the church. We're surprised by that. But here's the problem. It's really hard to show how much you care if you isolate yourself and cut yourself off from the rest of the world. It's really hard to show that you care, when you leave here as if you're putting on a hazmat suit and dumping all kinds of, hand sanitizer on you because you don't want to bump up against those who are in this world. The same one you're living in, by the way. And so we isolate ourselves. But here's the thing, and this is an old cliche, but it is true. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that's the problem we have as Christ followers today. Is we're really good at telling people we care about them, but we are very lousy at actually demonstrating or showing people that we love them. And so they can care less what we know until they know that we care. And it's affecting the younger generation. There's a blogger by the name of Rachel Held Evans. And she wrote this article on CNN, and I'm going to read it, and I want you to listen to what she's saying. She says, time and again, the assumption among Christian leaders and evangelical leaders in particular is that the key to drawing 20-somethings back to the church is simply to make a few style updates. Edgier music, more casual services, a coffee shop in the fellowship hall, an updated website that includes online giving, and a pastor who wears skinny jeans. Now, let me go on record right now. We will never make that adjustment as long as I'm here, because I prefer baggy jeans or stretchy pants. I just do. But here's what she says. But here's the thing. We millennials, having been advertised to our whole lives, we millennials, ages 21 to 36, have a highly sensitive BS meter. BS, I think, means bologna sandwich meter, as in they're full of bologna. I think that's what that means. We have this highly sensitive BS meter, and we're not easily impressed with consumerism or performances. In fact, I would argue that church as performance is just one more thing driving us away from the church. What millennials really want from the church is not a change in style, but a change in substance. We want to end the culture wars. We want a truce between science and faith. We want to be known for what we stand for, not for what we stand against. We want to ask questions that don't have predetermined canned answers. We want churches that emphasize an allegiance to the kingdom of God over an allegiance to a single political party or a single nation. Let me interrupt this sermon for this political announcement. If you've been around this church for 5.5 years, you know that I do not make political statements from up here. I do not use this pulpit to make political statements, but there is a statement I do need to make considering the political climate of our times. If you are a Christ follower who is supporting the D, or a Christ follower that is supporting the R, it is really difficult to tell people vehemently why you support the other one and still say that you're a Christ follower. Let's face it. We have one in the party who apparently is a little loose with the truth and has probably done some things illegal. We have someone else in the party that has an ego, that is proud, that is arrogant, and apparently believes that he can do whatever he wants with women that is immoral. So we have one that's doing something illegal, we have one that's doing something immoral. And if we are Christ followers, that's both wrong. And so here's what I want to caution us, challenge you as believers. We got 30 days left. Here's something I would like to say. You might want to go into that booth quietly and vote for whoever it is that you want to support quietly. Because the more you tout whichever candidate it is, the more it undermines your faith and your witness. So here's my challenge to you. Go into the booth. Vote for the D. Vote for the R. Vote for the I or the L. But do it quietly. If you want to do something publicly, you need to start talking about Jesus. That's who we need to start talking publicly about, because he's the answer, not the political people at the top of the party. And we spend so much time on social media arguing why Donald's the answer, while Hillary's the answer, and then we find all this information about them that we're like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe I'm even supporting this person. But what do? We dig our heels in and try to justify and defend them. Do you realize the right people are trying to defend Trump and this recent stuff? And yet those same people were all at Bill in the 90s for the same stuff. Same thing. We have Democrats that are attacking Trump, but they didn't seem to have a problem when Bill was doing it. You see? You see? Here's the point. I don't care what side of the aisle you or I are on. The more we tout the values of this person we're supporting or defend why we're supporting that person, the more what we are telling doesn't match what we are showing. So I want to challenge you. For the next 30 days, shut your mouths if you call yourself a follower of Christ. Talk about him. And go vote. But do it quietly. And then we all can rinse when we're done. You see, the thing is, Jesus is the answer, period. He wasn't a Republican. He wasn't a Democrat. He was an R, all right, but that R stands for redemption. He died to redeem all of us messed up people. And so he's the one you need to be casting your vote for. And he's the one you need to be talking about. Now, I will go back to my message. The point is, she said, we want churches to emphasize an allegiance to the kingdom of God over an allegiance to a single political party or nation. We want to be challenged to live lives of holiness, not only when it comes to sex and the sex stuff that's going on around this world, but also when it comes to living simply, caring for the poor, the oppressed, and pursuing reconciliation and engaging in the care of our creation and becoming peacemakers. And all of that, by the way, happens outside of here. All of that happens outside of here. She says, you can't hand us a latte and then go about business as usual and expect us to stick around. We are not leaving the church because we don't find the cool factor there. We're leaving the church because we don't find Jesus there. And the reason they don't find Jesus there, quite honestly, is because there's a lot of people that are part of churches all across the world that tell people all the time that they love Jesus and that Jesus is the answer. They just don't show it. We don't show it. And so we, whether we like it or not, have to earn the right to be heard. And it is really hard to show we care if we're quarantining ourselves and afraid to bump up against people who believe differently than us, who live differently than us, who act differently than us. How can we show that we care if we're afraid to be around them? And if we're going to call ourselves Christians, which again, I'm really not wild about that term. If you've been around here for any time at all, I like to use the word Christ followers because Christians, that term is so vanilla and has been so hijacked that everybody's a Christian. Look, Christian means Christ follower. And if you are a Christ follower, that means you're going to follow him where he goes. You're going to touch the things that he touched. You're going to say the things that he would say. And you're going to hang out with the people that he would hang out with. That's what a Christ follower does. Christians tend to go and do whatever they want. Christ followers tend to go wherever he wants. You see, when Jesus entered our world, he didn't box himself inside the temple or the synagogue and say, hey, if you want healed, if you want to hear a really inspiring message that's going to make you think, if you want to have somebody resurrected from the dead, here's what I want you to do. Just show up every Sunday at 9 or at 10:40, and I will be happy to meet with you then. No, Jesus left the walls. He walked into the lives of sinners. He touched the lepers. He associated with prostitutes. He dined with heathens. He irritated the religious community by leaving the walls of the synagogue. He irritated the religious leaders because he just wouldn't stand around with the good old boys of the church and talk shop. He irritated them because he went to hang out with people that would not be welcomed in those circles. That's why he irritated them. But he chose to not only come to this world, but to penetrate this world, this community, so that he could show and tell the love of his Father. If you look at Philippians chapter 2, verses 5 through 8, and I'm going to read it from the Message. It says this: Jesus had equal status with God, but didn't think so much of himself that he had to cling to the advantages of that status no matter what. Not at all. When the time came, he set aside the privileges of deity and took on the status of a slave. He became human. Having become human, he stayed human. It was an incredibly humbling process. He didn't claim special privileges. Instead, he lived a selfless, obedient life and then died a selfless, obedient death. And it was the worst kind of death, that being crucifixion. You know how that passage starts? That passage begins with Paul saying that our attitudes should be like that of Jesus. And what we see in that passage is Jesus, who had it pretty nice in heaven. It was pretty cozy, pretty comfy, life was good, decided to enter into this mess, this cesspool of the world. and take the lowest position in this world. He always took the worst seat at the table. He always took the position of servant. He basically left the cozy confines of heaven and took the lowest place, and it was humbling. But yet he did it. And if we are going to call ourselves Christ followers, then get this. We have to leave the cozy confines of what might feel like heaven sometimes on Sunday mornings and go out and take the lowest position in our communities, in our circles of influence, and serve like he served, and sacrifice like he sacrificed. Because it says that our attitude should be like him. And that's what he did, and that's what we do. But unfortunately, we don't. We tend to avoid it, we tend to run from it, we tend to hide from it. But John Stott said, we are to go as he went, to penetrate human society, to mix with unbelievers and fraternize with sinners. Does not one of the church's greatest failures lie there, in those things? We have disengaged too much. We have become a withdrawn community. We have become aloof instead of alongside. You see, Jesus wanted us to go. It's not a strategy. It's not a tactic. It's the way he was. And if we're going to follow him, we need to follow him where he would go and touch who he would touch. In Matthew 5:13 and 16, he talks about how we are to be the salt of the earth, the light of the world. You know, he talks about salt. If it loses its saltiness, it's not even worth the manure pile. In Luke, basically the idea of salt is, in order for it to have any benefit, it has to actually be on whatever it is that it's benefiting. So the whole concept of the rotting flesh, the preserving of things, salt is useless if it's not on that rotting flesh, if it's not cleansing those wounds, if it's not preserving. In other words, the salt has to be in the proximity of that which needs the salt. And so if we're going to be the salt of the earth, then we better be where it's needed, or else we are useless and we are only, well, actually it says we're not even worthy of the manure pile, and I'm cleaning it up. He says we're to be the light. Light is to penetrate the darkness. Light is to bring light into the darkness. And you don't take a light and hide it under a lamp or a bushel or hide it under your bed. You take it into the dark places. And that's what he says we need to do. And there's a lot that needs to be salting in this community. And there's a lot of light that is needed in this community. And he tells us that that's what he expects of us. Is to not just tell them from a safe distance about the love of Jesus, but go among them and show it. Share it. So let me wrap it up by these quick statements. What does it look like for the Crossing to love this community or to love others? What does it look like for us, or any church for that matter, to actually be for the community and to have an outward focus? Well, the first thing is churches that are outward focused, that are for the community, are convinced that good deeds and good news goes hand in hand. A lot of us want to tell the good news, but we don't couple that with the good deeds. And they go hand in hand. The good news when it's expressed in loving acts of service, the good news is validated. Because we're not just talking the talk, we're walking the walk. And so they go hand in hand. As Tony Wolf said, the world will be convinced Jesus is the best option when Christians produce the best individuals. And the watching world will be more convinced when the good news of Jesus is accompanied by the good deeds of the Jesus followers. Engaging the community with good news and good deeds is not a strategy. Again, it is a way of life. It is what Jesus expects because it's what Jesus did. He didn't just bring the good news. He brought healing. Second, a church that is for the community or others actually sees themselves as vital to the health and the well-being of this community. They see themselves as, we need to get in there. We need to get in the marketplace. We need to be a part of that because this community is suffering, and we need to be in the middle of that. We need to be for them. We need to be an asset, not a liability. The community needs Christ right now, and we are the body of Christ, so that means they need us. And that's what we need to look. We need to see it that way because we can't see it as, well, we're the church and over here's the community. The church has to be in it to be able to bring that salt, to bring that light, to make the difference. You know, we've asked this question a lot, and right now it's hypothetical because we're here this morning. But for the last 5.5 years, we'd ask this question all the time. If the crossing was no longer here, would anybody even notice it's gone? Would anybody say, you know what, I hate it because that was a group that they did this or they really helped here or there? Or would it be a situation where you'd miss it for a little bit because you'd be like, oh, what was it I did on Sunday mornings? What did I do for those 3 hours? Oh, that's right, I went to that church called The Crossing. If that's all we would say if this church is gone, then we are not the church that Jesus intended for us to be. If we are no longer in existence and we are not missed, then we're wasting our time. And I was thinking about some of the businesses in the Eastgate area, and there's been a lot that's come and gone. And I thought, what is the Eastgate area? What is a business that I miss more than anything? And you know what? I'm going to tell you, the one I miss more than anything is Borders. The Borders bookstore. I, to this day, wish a Barnes & Noble or a Joseph Beth would come in this area. The reason I liked it is because I have a Kindle and I read the e-books, but I'm still kind of old-fashioned. I like to hold my book. I like to smell my book. I like to be able to underline it, dog-ear it. I like to be able to loan it out, pass it out. I like to be in the book, to turn the pages. The other thing I liked about Borders is it was someplace I could go, and even if I didn't have the money, I could spend all day just walking up and down the aisles, or if I was going to travel someplace, I could get the travel books, and I could research it all for free, and I could just sit there. I enjoyed the Seattle's best coffee, and usually a muffin or some sort of cinnamon roll. And you know what else I really, really, really enjoyed, and what I really, really, really miss? Is it was at that bookstore or the Barnes & Nobles that we lived around that I always took my girls on a daddy-daughter date. It was there that my girls would go to the children's section and get stacks of books because they love to read. And there I'd get my books, and we'd all meet over at the coffee shop, and they'd get hot chocolate and a cookie, and I'd get a coffee and a Cinnabon or whatever. And then we would sit there in each other's presence. And sometimes they would slide and say, hey, Dad, look at this, look. Sometimes they say, what's that word? Sometimes they say, will you buy this for me? And I'd say, no. But I miss that. I miss the community. I miss the relationship. I miss the environment. I miss what it did for my family. Now, for you, maybe you miss something else. Maybe for you, you miss Cheeseburger in Paradise. I don't know. But for some of us, when it's no longer there, we really, really, really miss it. And for others, you're like, there was a Borders here? I didn't even know. I don't read. I didn't even know. You see, the point is, the church needs to be a place that if it no longer existed, and I talk again, this body, this group of people, if we no longer existed, we better be missed, or we're wasting our time. The church needs to be a place that builds bridges, not walls. And that's not a Trump reference, by the way. We need to build bridges, but we build too many walls. Churches need to be for the community, or churches that are for the community believe that ministering and serving are normal expressions. It's just what you do. You minister and serve. Followers of Christ grow the most when they're serving and when they're giving. Period. It just does. You grow more when you're serving and when you're giving. And that's because Jesus said, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others and to give his life as a ransom for many. So if you're a Christ follower, you grow the most when you look the most like him, when you are serving and when you are giving. You know, over the last 5.5 years, there aren't too many people that go out there and talk and say, you know what I remember about that church is Kenny's talking. Man, I love that talking. Or man, I remember that sermon, or I remember that, or I remember Jay's communion meditation, or I remember this or that. There's very little that I ever hear people going out and recanting what has been talked, what has been said. But here's what people talk about. Man, I will never forget that time when we made those 27,000 meals. I will never forget the Grace Fest. I will never forget the Turkey Crusade. I will never forget when we gave the first $50,000 that we raised in an offering and we gave it away to the community. I will never forget the opportunities to be able to make backpacks, hand out backpacks. I will never forget the time when you came to my house to bring me a meal or to clean my house. I will never forget the time. See, the things that we remember, the things that have the impact not only on us, but on our community is not talk. It's action. It's serving and giving. Those are the things that has the greatest impact. The final thing, churches who are for the community or for others just reach more people. It's a fact. If you're actually for the community or for others, guess what? You're gonna get to know others, and others are gonna get to know you, and others just actually might want to follow you, and might want to come and be a part of what you're a part of. It's no secret that churches in America, well, we're not doing a very good job. There are so many people that are far from God. Attendance in the U.S. churches, like 85, 90% of them have either plateaued or declining. Thousands of churches close their door every year. In other words, we churches, people, again, the bodies of Christ, are not doing a very good job. We're failing miserably. You know, we are growing up in a generation where there is actually, believe it or not, a generation of people who don't know how to go to church. You're like, what? Don't know how to go to church? What do you mean you don't know how to go to church? I mean, who doesn't know how to go to church? Well, let me ask you, do you know how to go to a mosque? Do you know how to go to a Buddhist temple? Do you know how to go to a synagogue? Would you know, and when I mean that, would you know, am I welcome there? How would I dress? Is there assigned seats? Do I kneel? Do I get up? What do I do? What do I do? I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to do in a mosque because I've never been to one. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or how to go to a Buddhist temple. We are living in a generation, believe it or not, that do not know how to go to church. They don't know what's going to be expected of them. They don't know what's going to happen. And so they don't come. Unless the church goes outside the walls and goes where they are. Goes to their turf. Goes to their environment, to their comfort zone, and builds a legitimate relationship with them. Then guess what? They don't mind coming to hang out with you because they trust you. They believe that you care for them. That's one of the reasons, one of the big things that I talk about a lot is when we go out there and we're serving, we need to serve with the attitude that there's no strings attached. We cannot go out and serve someone as if we have an agenda. We cannot go out there and build trust in these people if what we give them the impression is I want something from you. The only reason I'm talking to you is I want something from you. I'm trying to get a spiritual merit badge. I didn't try to get some notches in my belt. So that's the only reason I'm talking to you right now is because I need something from you. We cannot have that attitude. Because what happens is when we go out there and they get the sense the only reason we're out there is so we can grow our church, or the only reason I'm out there talking about it is so I can feel a little bit better about my spiritual life, again, me. If that's what they sense, the BS meter goes up. And we all are guilty of it. It happens all the time. Let me just say it to you this way. That there's this sense of, all right, what's the catch? What do you really want? What is it you really want from me? You want my money, don't you? Or you want this or that. We do it all the time. Dad, you come home from work and your teenage son is standing there waiting for you with the newspaper, an ice-cold Coke, and a remote control. He ushers you to the lazy boy chair, sits down, and he says, man, I'm so glad, Dad, that we could have this time to talk. How was your day? How was work? Is things going good? You seem a little stressed. Can I help you with anything? What can I do for you? Can I find your favorite channel? If that happens, dads, what are you thinking? The bologna sandwich meter is going right now because you're sitting there thinking, all right, what's he want? He must want to borrow the car. He must have wrecked the car. He must want to buy the car. And let's flip it. Guys, if it's your teenage daughter saying and doing all those things, you're like, she wants to get in a car with a boy. Either way, you're thinking, I'm getting taken for a ride here. We're suspicious. Well, the community we live in feels the very same way because they've gotten tired of hearing people tell all day long about Jesus and not showing it. So when we come to them, don't be surprised if the meter goes up and they're like, well, what do they want? What's their angle? Don't be surprised by that because we've done such a terrible job showing it because we're in our little cocoons telling people rather than showing. They're going to tune you out. They're not going to trust you. They're going to feel that you're being insincere and inauthentic. And they're going to believe that it's all about you, not about them. And we've got to get to the point where we go where Jesus goes and we touch who Jesus touched so that they realize we are not saying this because we want something from you. We're saying this because we want something for you, and that for you is Jesus. We want you to have a relationship with Jesus because he's the only answer. Let me just close with this comment and this story. We have to not only tell, we have to show. Because as messengers of Jesus and his good news, we have a real difficult task, not because the message isn't compelling. It's a very compelling message, but it's because we're not very compelling messengers. Cindy and I were out west, as you all have heard. We went to an area called Astoria, which is where the Columbia River meets the Pacific Ocean. It's a beautiful little town, Lewis and Clark. That's where they ended up before they found the Pacific. And as we're there, we're touring this maritime museum, and off behind the museum is a boat called the Columbia, and it's a light boat. Basically it's a floating lighthouse. You had the lighthouse on the shore, and the boat would anchor there, and people would live on it for 60 to 90 days straight. It never moved. It wouldn't go out and rescue anybody. It was just this light, and it would shine. And it wasn't until GPS and all that came that they finally decided to make it a part of the museum. But as we're touring this boat, and I'm looking around thinking, man, I would not want to live on this boat for 90 days, just floating out there. One of the most treacherous mouths where the river and it'd be rocky. I wouldn't. But as we're touring, we're going down in the underbelly of it, the bottom, whatever you call it, below deck. And as we're there, we hear this and so I'm like, that must be the radio room. Must be part of the display. So Cindy and I go and we peek in and realize, there's a guy in there doing it, a real live person. And so we kind of walk away. And then we come back by and he's like, y'all can come on in. Come on in. So we step in there and it was this older gentleman that was sitting there hitting the keys doing Morse code. And I want to tell you the truth. When we went in there, I met my match because I know how you all feel now. Because when I went into that room, I did not leave that room for at least 45 minutes. And he talked the entire time. Cindy was like, in 29 years, she had never seen someone who could match me, who had as much hot air and wind as I did and can go for so long without even getting in a word. But we found him. And he was down there. And I guess when you do that all day, you just got to talk. And so he talked and he started sharing all this interesting stuff, all about the area, all about the region. But he said something that really stuck out, got us both of our antennas going up. He said, There's one thing about this area, though, that, it's kind of dangerous because there's these two shelves that just, these fault lines that are just off of the coast here. And, I mean, they're up against each other, and one's kind of gotten wedged up under the other, and every so often they have to release themselves, and it creates this effect. Well, this happens every 200 to 250 years that this finally releases. Well, this has been now 300 years since this has happened. So at any moment, the big one will come. I mean, they're sending seismologists down here to research this all the time. So at any moment, it's going to release. And when it does, the big one hits, there's going to be not only a tsunami, but when it happens, this whole area that we're standing on right now is going to drop about 30 feet down. And it's going to create this big, huge tsunami. And we will be like wiped out. And as he's saying this, I'm thinking, oh, God, thank you that we are on a boat right now, just in case it happens anytime now. And so then I asked him, the only thing I got to get in is, well, are you prepared for something like that? He goes, oh, yeah, I am. I'm very prepared. As a matter of fact, at my house, I live out by the coast, I found the tallest tree that I can find. Because when it happens, it's going to happen so fast, we're not going to be able to get away. So I found the tallest tree, and I designed this pulley system that will pull me up on a seat to the very top. And there are rations there, there is food there, there's water there, and there's this big, long stick. And people think that big, long stick is there so that when people are coming by, I can stick it out there and help them out and pull them in. But no. That big, long stick there is to keep people away. I've got this big, long stick there so I can poke the animals that are going to want to swim up to the tree and poke the people away, because if they actually climb on, that thing is going to bend over and we're all gone. So that big, long stick is there to protect me. And as he's saying all this, I'm thinking to myself, wow. One, this guy has to be one of the loneliest people I've ever met, to sit in a little room all day long hitting a key. But then I also thought, this man who supposedly has figured it all out, knows that the big one is coming, and yet his action plan isn't to alarm everybody else or to set up some sort of rescue plan for everybody else. His is to climb at the top of the tree and get his big, long stick out and make sure nobody else gets close. And I was thinking to myself, wow. And then it hit me. There are a lot of Christians and churches that act the exact same way. We tell everybody, the big one's coming. You better be ready, because when it hits, you're either with him or you're gone. So it's coming. And we tell people that. We've got the solution, it's Jesus. We tell people that. But rather than getting out there and loving them and showing them all that we're telling them, instead we like to sit in a little radio room called a worship center and hammer out codes. Love God, love people, love God, love people, love God, love people, love God, love people. And every so often, we'll get out this big long stick. Instead of leading someone to salvation with it, we will smack them upside the head with it and use it as a weapon. And that's what we do when we spend all of our time telling without action, without showing. You see, when that gentleman tells me all that stuff, my thought in my head is, this guy is either a conspiracy theorist or he is the most self-centered, selfish person I've ever met in my life. Doesn't have a care in the world for anybody else. And the reality is, the world looks at us and says, they're either a bunch of conspiracy theorists that believe in some sort of fantasy, or they're the most self-centered people I've ever met. Because they can talk all day long about Jesus. They just do a terrible job of actually showing him and demonstrating him and acting like him. And so I just want to say, as the pastor of this body of people, God is for you. But God is also for others that are not named you. The great commandment is to love God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love others as ourselves. That is about him, and that is about them. There is nothing in that statement that allows us to be inward. It's all upward or outward. So if you call yourselves a Christ follower, and if you call yourself someone who is a part of or affiliated with this local body known as the Crossing, it is not good enough for us to talk all day long about the love of Jesus unless we get out into the community, bump up against the community, and show it. And so I'm going to close, and I'm going to pray, and I'm going to ask you to pray. And I'm going to ask that God has not said, that you haven't heard what Kenny said, but that you will hear what it is that he said to you. So let's pray. God, you know my heart. You know how much I've had to repent myself and how many times I've had to confess the times that I have been more show or more talk than show, that I've been more talk than the walk. And so God, I just ask for your forgiveness for the times that I have truly not been the ambassador or the true representative of your Son, Jesus, that I need to be. God, I pray that as a church that we will not have the gravitational pull that becomes inward, the kind of pull that it's all about me, it's all about what I want, it's all about my needs, it's all about what feeds me and takes care of me. God, may it be all about you and all about those who don't know you. Period. So God, put that burden in me, put that burden in everyone here that call themselves followers of your Son Jesus, who came to serve and to lay down his life as the ransom for all of us. May our attitudes be like his. And I pray this in his wonderful name, the name above all names, the name that not only needs to be heard, but the one who needs to be received. And I pray this in his name.